Good morning. We are going to be discussing my EDL 850 case study. This takes place in a small K-8 school. It is St. Regis. It is in a rural area, and just like many small schools, they are low on funds and rely on fundraisers for a lot of their money. Mr. Keith Sample is the principal. He is not a hometown guy, and being in his third year, he has really gotten out in the community to build relationships and buy-in for school. Over the last few years, the fundraisers with the school and PTA have gone to creating and buying computers for a computer lab. Mrs. Lynn is the library specialist. She and Mr. Sample work together to talk with teachers and figure out what kind of software would be best for them. This software was then purchased, and the teachers have been utilizing it since that time. Mrs. Lynn wanted to help the teachers expand the software into their classrooms on some of the computers they had, and so she decided to save money and to wisely use the school's funds. She would copy the software and give that to the teachers. Everyone was really pretty excited about that, except Mrs. Brandon. She was a third-year teacher, and she had experience in another school district and had some past history with knowing that copying software was against the Copyright Act. Mrs. Brandon got together with Mrs. Lynn and shared her concerns, and they really weren't received too well. Mrs. Lynn thought that she had done nothing wrong and that she was simply trying to help the teachers. Mrs. Brandon took her concerns to Mr. Sample, and he also confronted Mrs. Lynn about this, and she just really held that she hadn't done anything, and she was utilizing school funds and helping her district save money, so she really thought it was a non-issue. There are some legal implications to think about in this case. By copying the software, Mrs. Lynn did break the Copyright Act of 1976. They purchased the software for the library computers, and that purchase or license agreement was a contractual agreement. And when they copied or reproduced the software, that agreement was breached. Not really one person was hurt by this, but the school could be held liable and be accountable for some damages. Just basically to sum it up in one sentence, you could say that the reproduction of purchased software for classroom use, although seemingly done out of the desire to help the school, is illegal and puts St. Regis in noncompliance with the Copyright Act. So let's look at some of the facts. The people involved or the major stakeholders would be Mr. Sample, who is the principal, Mrs. Lynn, who's the library media specialist and runs the computer lab, Mrs. Brandon, who is the third-year teacher who has some experience from another school, and then also the PTA. It takes place at St. Regis, like we had talked about. They are a rural K-8 school. There are about 2 teachers per grade level. They also have 2 special education teachers, one for grades K4 and the other for 5-8. Once they are finished with 8th grade, they transport by bus to the larger city, which is about 25 miles away, and they are a public school. Just kind of reviewing some information that was important to me. This violation of copyright could cause repercussions for the school or possibly Mrs. Lynn. They could face monetary damages, but more than likely maybe just destroying the copies would be sufficient. The principal, the teachers, and the PTA are the major stakeholders in the situation. And the PTA, even though maybe they didn't make the final decisions, needs to be contacted. They really helped to raise the money and were crucial in buying the software. And so they really need to understand the copyright laws as well. I think that there's a lot of information presented, but in order to figure out where I want to go next and the consequences, I need to ask a few more questions. I need to know to Mr. Sample, did he provide any training on copyright to his teachers? Did Mrs. Lynn knowingly violate copyright, or was she truly just trying to help the school and save money? I'm curious if there are any policies in place documenting the chain of command when these decisions are made. And also, I'm curious if the PTA is aware of the rules regarding copyright. I think if I answered the above questions, I would have enough information to make final decisions. And I really think it's important for me to remember as a principal that when we're thinking about consequences or outcomes, they should not be developed maybe on our first analysis. We need to dig a little bit deeper, talk to everybody involved, so we can make a really informed decision. Possible options and consequences. I've listed a few, and so let's go through those. One would be not making a decision at all. And I think this is a really poor solution. It just kind of allows for future incidents to happen, and you are actually still in violation of copyright. Maybe the most comprehensive would be to train all staff members to possibly suspend Mrs. Lynn from her duties as the computer lab teacher, and also suspending the violated software. Maybe a more liberal approach would be just to sweep it under the rug and hope that no one finds out. And then some intermediate strategies that you could maybe put forth would be meet with the PTA to discuss the policies and law that schools have to follow. Specialized training for the librarian media specialists so they can have factual information for the copyright law, disposing of the copied software, and then possibly the evaluation or addition of policies that address the decision-making chain of command. All right, so let's kind of evaluate each option before we make our choice. First off would be taking no action. Like I said, this is a very poor decision, I believe. While the software company may never find out, it's not the right thing to do. If we let the wrong thing slide, then that's what's just going to happen in the future. So I don't think this is a good option at all. The more comprehensive, the training for all staff members, the possible suspension of computer lab duties, and then also suspension of the violated software. I think some questions to ask in this case would, how many resources would this take? How much time? How much money? And would this information be necessary for some of the teachers, or would it just be kind of a waste of resource? Would there be someone to take over the computer lab for Mrs. Lynn if she was suspended? Oftentimes, small schools don't have the staff, and so this might not even be possible. And then if you actually discontinued the use of all the software, would that be hurting the kids or the students, and really they didn't have any part of this, and we wouldn't want to hurt them. The next solution would be sweeping it under the rug. I really also think that this would not be something you'd want to do. I think Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon's relationship could continue to suffer. I think there might be resentment among staff members if we pretend that it didn't happen. And then Mrs. Lynn may also feel like she can make these kind of decisions in the future, and we want her to think maybe or follow a chain of command instead of doing that. Something else, we could meet with the PTA and discuss the laws and policies schools have to follow. I think this is great. I think it would create positive relations with the PTA. They would feel maybe like we are sharing information and going towards shared goals. And if they understand the reasons why we can't do it, then maybe they'll think twice about doing something like this, even if it's saving the school money. Training for the library media specialist. I think this is a great idea. It specializes the training for people who need to know the information. It doesn't waste resources, and it gives her the information she needs to make future decisions based upon facts instead of just her opinion. And then another would be the disposal of the copied software. I think this would be recognizing that the copying was not the correct decision. We are, taking action. We're doing the right thing. The school would no longer be in violation of the Copyright Act, and then it just helps teachers see that we will follow policies at school, and there is a chain of command. And lastly, we would do an evaluation of policies that address the decision-making chain of command in our school. Anytime you review old policies, I think it's a great idea. It helps you see how you can freshen them, make them better, or see if you have great policies in place. It would also give teachers a clear-cut decision-making process, so they wouldn't have the stress of trying to figure it out on their own. It allows for consistency in decision-making, and the staff can feel more like a team if they're all following the same policies. So, how do we choose the best option? I think it takes reflection on all aspects of the issue. Informed decisions happen best when you take your emotions and also your relationships out of play. If you can do this, you can have a well thought out solution. And really great solutions are those that don't just affect one person, but they benefit the whole team. So, what are we going to do? Or what am I going to do, I should say? After reviewing the information, I think I have a multi-prong approach that will hopefully help solve this issue and then maybe take care of issues that could happen in the future. First, I would conference with Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon. I want to reduce any hard feelings. I want them to know that they're both coming from a great place, trying to help the school, but there are certain things that have to be followed, and I really want their relationship to be strong. I'd schedule a meeting with the PTA to go over the copyright rules so they would understand why we couldn't do this instead of just thinking that we didn't want to help the kids. I'd also then dispose of the copied software and only use it in the computer lab. This way, if any questions arose, I could say we did the right thing. And then lastly, I would get additional training for Mrs. Lynn on copyright so that she would have the information she needed to make future decisions. Some final reflections. I really think Mrs. Lynn did this out of the goodness of her heart, trying to utilize funds correctly and help the school and not from a place of trying to break any law. Other PTA members and teachers supported it, but I also think they came from the same place. They were trying to do what was best for their kids, but still save some money. Mrs. Brandon, even though it caused a little tension, she was correct in bringing these concerns to light. It was important for her to try to protect the school, and she had additional background and information that helped her make this decision. I think conferences need to be held with the teachers involved in the PTA. I think they should be done singly first so we can understand where everybody's coming from and no one feels like they're being singled out, but then come together to build those relationships and to continue on. Communication is going to be key. Communicating why we are doing things, why we are destroying the copies, and just why we can't do that. And so everyone can have the information they need to make the right decision. Implementing the plan. So the first thing I would do would be meet with the teachers involved. I would talk to them. I'd get their side of the story. So that way I can understand why they did it and maybe, gain some further insight. I also want to meet with Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon together. I want them to be able to talk about what happened. I don't want there to be hard feelings, and I want them both to know that they came from the right place of trying to help the school, and that's a really cool thing, and I want them to come together and work really well side by side. After the meeting with all the stakeholders, I would have the copies of the software destroyed. We can't do that. It's a violation of the copyright, and it's just showing the teachers that even if mistakes happen, we're going to do the right thing in the end. And then lastly, I would schedule that training for Mrs. Lynn so she could have the information needed to make great decisions in the lab in the future. Some different things just to consider while implementing the plan. I want the staff and PTA to know that even though I destroyed the software that was copied, I'm very appreciative of them looking for saving options and also trying to further the education of the students in our school. I want Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon to know that they really have some shared goals and they should be proud of themselves for trying to do what's best for kids, but we just have to think about some of the other issues before those decisions are made. I want the staff to understand that in any case, I do value their opinion. I trust their judgment, but in bigger decisions, it's important to know that my door is always open so we can have conversations about maybe policies or what's right and what's wrong, and so we can make some of those decisions together. And then I want to make sure I'm giving my staff the tools so that in future situations that they can do the right thing and they really know that I have their back and that we can make hard decisions together. My final thoughts, I think I have to be diligent in checking in. with teachers and following through on school policy. I have to be consistent when handling incidents. Not every situation is going to be handled the same, but I need to be able to do that consistently. And then most importantly, I need to show everyone involved respect. We have to work through disagreements or poor decisions, and that can be a really hard thing to do, but we don't want resentment or anger to be part of our building. It's my job to find solutions and help correct the issues, but still be supportive of my staff and help them grow from all their experiences. All right, thanks everybody. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you have a great day.